In the first age, when the world was young and the gods still walked among the mountains of the earth, there rose from the endless waters a kingdom not made by mortal hands, but by the breath of the divine and the will of the ocean herself, and its name was Atlan, the city of the deep, the pearl of creation, whose towers shone brighter than the stars of the firmament, and whose streets were paved with the stones of dawn. The sea wrapped itself about this city as a mother cradles her child, and in her depths lay the power that nourished it. For Atlan was the covenant between heaven and abyss, born of a promise made in the time before time, when the gods swore never again to drown the world in chaos. In that sacred era ruled King Thalos, son of Nerathos, god of the boundless sea, and Lyara, queen of men whose heart was as steadfast as stone, and whose eyes mirrored the calm of the deep. And Thalos was mighty among all kings, tall as the cedars of the west, his voice carrying the weight of command, and his spirit burning with the golden flame of destiny. He ruled with wisdom in his youth and courage in his strength, and the people of Atlan worshipped him not merely as a sovereign, but as the living bond between God and man. Around his throne sat the 12 high lords of the sea, each sworn to uphold the harmony between wave and shore. And they built temples of crystal where the waters flowed upward and light danced upon the ceilings like liquid fire. Yet even in the age of peace, the seed of pride was sown. For Atlan grew rich and powerful beyond measure, and its artisans learned to draw power from the very breath of the ocean. The Heartfire, a shimmering light that pulsed beneath the coral mountains far below the city's roots. The priests warned that the Heartfire was sacred, the slumbering blood of the world, but Thalos, moved by dreams of dominion, sought to harness it, saying that if the gods had gifted men the sea, then men might learn to rule it as equals. In those days, his queen was Lyara, fairer than dawn, whose voice could still the storms and whose heart beat with the rhythms of the tide. She loved Thalos dearly, yet she feared the fire in his soul, for she had seen in dreams a wave that would swallow the sun. "My king," she said, "beware the gifts of the deep, for that which sleeps beneath us remembers the ages before gods, and not all that is ancient is kind." But Thalos laughed and kissed her hand, saying, "Fear not, beloved, for the sea is my father and the stars are my witness. No darkness shall rise against Atlan while my crown still gleams." Thus began the great work of the deep forges, where men and women of Atlan descended into the blue chasms to draw forth the light of the Heartfire, shaping it into stones that never dimmed, into weapons that sang with living flame, and into ships that flew upon the wind and wave alike. The gods, watching from the heavens, murmured among themselves, and some wept, for they saw in Atlan's glory the reflection of their own lost rebellion when light had first been born from chaos. Nerathos, father of Thalos, rose from his throne beneath the sea and came unto his son in a storm. "Thalos," he spake, his voice a thunder that split the waves, "thou art my blood and the breath of the ocean's promise, yet thou forgettest the covenant that bound gods and men alike. The Heartfire is not thine to wield. It is the pulse of the abyss, chained by the will of the eternal. Touch it, and thou awakenest that which even I fear." But Thalos, proud and unbending, answered, "If I am thy son, O father of the tides, then grant me the right to master the sea as thou hast done. Shall the son of the ocean tremble before its depths?" And Nerathos, beholding the fire in his child's eyes, wept salt tears that fell as rain upon the city, saying, "So begins the sorrow that shall end the world." Then he vanished into the storm, leaving behind silence heavy as the grave, and still Atlan prospered, brighter than any realm beneath the sun. Its spires touched the clouds, its scholars spoke with the stars, and its warriors carried blades of azure flame. Songs were sung across the seas of its beauty and its might, and men from distant lands came seeking wisdom from its temples. Yet beneath the waves something stirred. The priests of the deep, keepers of the oldest songs, spoke in secret of Abyrath, the sleeper beneath the world, who in the first chaos had devoured the light until the gods had bound him beneath the ocean floor. "He dreams," they said, "and in his dreams he hears the voice of mortal pride." Few believed them, for the sea seemed calm, and Thalos's reign unbroken. But Lyara wept at night, for she could feel the pulse of the deep quickening, like a heartbeat in the dark. Thus passed the first signs of doom unnoticed, the red tide that washed upon the shore, the whales that sang no longer, the pearls that turned black in the hands of maidens. Thalos saw these and called them omens of change, saying that the old gods faded because mankind had learned to stand without them. Yet the wind whispered otherwise, and the waves spoke to those who still listened. On the eve of the 7th equinox of his reign, Thalos climbed the Tower of Tides, the highest place in Atlan, to gaze upon his city. From that height he beheld its wonder, the silver bridges, the rivers of light, the laughter of his people echoing through marble halls, and his heart swelled with both pride and dread, for he knew that perfection is the mirror in which destruction loves to see itself. He turned to the horizon where storm clouds gathered like gods in council, and there he thought he heard a voice, deep, ancient, and patient, whispering from the sea's black heart, calling his name. And the whisper grew like thunder made of breath, like the sigh of a god forgotten by all who dwell upon the land, and it said unto Thalos, "Son of the wave, heir of the abyss, dost thou not feel my gift beneath thy feet? I am the pulse thou hast sought, the flame that sleepeth under stone. Take of me, and thy city shall be eternal." Thalos, standing upon the tower's edge, felt the voice not in his ears, but within his blood, as if the very water that filled his veins yearned to obey. He trembled, for it was sweet and terrible to hear the sea call his name as though he were her master. Yet when the dawn broke, he said nothing to Lyara nor to his priests, for he feared to name what he had heard, lest it vanish or become real. So began the secret descent of Thalos into the deep, for each night thereafter he would walk alone to the shore where the waters whispered and the sand glowed faintly blue beneath his tread. There, beneath the moons of Atlan, he would kneel, and the sea would part before him like a lover yielding her embrace. And Lyara, whose dreams were woven with tides, soon knew his wanderings, for she would wake to find his throne empty and the salt wind in the halls. She followed him once, cloaked in shadow, and beheld him standing upon the waves, arms raised, speaking to the black horizon where no star shone. Her heart broke, for she knew then that the sea had claimed him fully, and that no mortal love could hold against the hunger of the deep. She returned in silence, praying to Nerathos to protect his son, but the god answered only with distant thunder. In those days, the priests of the Temple of Shells came forth with warnings. They spoke of tremors beneath the ocean floor, and songs of sorrow rising from the trenches. They begged the king to cease his mining of the Heartfire. Thalos rebuked them, saying that fear was the chain of the weak, and that destiny bowed only to courage. Thus he sent the priests away, and sealed the temple doors, ordering the forges to burn brighter. Then came the festival of the sea's breath, when all of Atlan rejoiced and cast offerings upon the waves, and Lyara, in her despair, stood before the people and sang the hymn of the covenant, that sacred song which once bound gods to men. Her voice, clear as moonlight upon still waters, rose over the city, and for a moment the storms abated, the sea stilled, and the stars themselves listened. But when her song ended, a great silence fell, and from beneath the waves, the Heartfire pulsed once, twice, and then blazed like the birth of a new sun. The waters around Atlan glowed crimson, and every creature of the deep fled screaming into the black. The people cried out in wonder and fear, but Thalos, standing beside his queen, declared it a sign of favor from the gods. That night, however, the voice returned to him louder than ever, saying, "Thy city burns with my light, O son of the deep. Break the chains of the abyss, and I shall make thee as the gods who walk the sky." And Thalos, drunk with the glory of his own greatness, whispered back, "What must I do?" The sea answered with dreams. In visions he beheld a gate of stone, buried far beneath the Heartfire, inscribed with runes so old that even gods had forgotten their meaning. In the dream he descended alone, bearing the spear of the sea, and struck the gate thrice, whereupon it opened, and a light darker than shadow poured forth. When he woke, his hands were wet with salt, and the sound of waves filled his chamber, though no wind blew. He rose and summoned his engineers, commanding them to delve deeper than ever before to seek the gate he had seen. They obeyed in awe, for who would deny a king who spoke with gods? For 40 days and nights the forges roared, the waters boiled, and the miners sang songs to ward off the darkness. Lyara watched helplessly, her prayers unanswered, her warnings unheard. And on the 41st day, they found it, a door of black stone beneath the world, vast as a mountain and cold as death. Upon its face were carved shapes that seemed to move when no one watched, and from the cracks seeped light like liquid shadow. Thalos came forth clad in silver armor that gleamed like moonlit foam, the spear of the sea in his hand, and before his gathered people he proclaimed, "Behold the threshold of eternity. This is the womb of creation, the cradle of gods. From this place shall Atlan rise above heaven itself." The priests fled, tearing their robes and crying doom, but the soldiers knelt, shouting his name. Then Thalos descended alone into the gate's chamber, and the sea grew still, as if holding its breath. He stood before the door and felt it tremble beneath his palm, and the whisper returned, no longer faint but thundering. "Strike, my son. Set me free." And he struck. Once, and the stone shuddered like a living thing. Twice, and the world above quaked, sending ripples across the surface. Thrice, and the door cracked open, spilling forth a wind that smelled of eternity and decay. Out of the breach came a voice that was not a voice, a presence that devoured thought, and it said, "I am Abyrath, the first and the last, the darkness that hungered before light was born. Thou hast freed me, child of pride." Thalos fell, to his knees, overcome by the weight of its being, and cried, "I sought only to raise my city, to give my people the glory of the gods." But Abyrath laughed, and the laughter broke mountains beneath the sea. "So too did the gods once speak," it said, "and I consumed them. Thou shalt have thy glory in ruin." The Heartfire erupted, its brilliance turning to black flame, and the waters roared as if all the oceans of the world had awakened in wrath. In Atlan above, towers cracked, light dimmed, and the people fled as waves rose higher than the walls. Lyara, seeing the sea climb toward the sky, cried out to Nerathos once more, "Father of my husband, save thy child." And from the depths came the god himself, vast as the horizon, bearing the trident of the abyss. He faced the darkness that poured from the gate, and the heavens split with their clash. Lightning burned the sea to glass, and thunder became the voice of sorrow. Nerathos fought for 7 breaths of eternity, binding Abyrath once more with chains of storm and song, but even a god cannot undo pride's wound completely. The gate closed, but not before the darkness touched Thalos' heart. When the waters stilled, the god was gone, and Atlan lay trembling, half drowned, its glory dimmed. And when the storm abated, silence reigned over Atlan, heavy as the grave, and the city trembled beneath the sky, for though Abyrath had been chained, the shadow it had left lingered in every street and hall, in every heart that had once celebrated Thalos' triumph. And Lyara, pale as the moon reflected upon the blood-tinged waves, knelt among the ruins of the Temple of Shells, her hands clasped over her breast as if to hold her own heart together, for she knew that the man she loved had touched the darkness and would never again be wholly the child of the sea she had once embraced. And yet her soul burned with a fierce devotion. And she called upon Nerathos and upon the tides, and upon the very memory of the deep, saying, Father of my husband, grant him mercy, grant my people reprieve, and bind this sorrow lest it consume all. And the sea answered with a soft swell and a whispering current that braided through the broken streets. For though the god had departed, his essence lingered, and in it Thalos felt a presence enter his mind, a reminder of love and of duty, and he rose, kneeling among the stones that had been his pride, and spoke aloud, his voice raw with grief and newfound reverence. O Abyrath, and all powers that dwell beneath and above, I sought glory, yet wrought destruction. I sought to master the eternal, yet I am chained to mortality. Let this city, these people, bear my atonement, and let my hands build what my pride has shattered. Yet as he spoke, the curse of the deep took root, for the Heartfire, though dimmed, had left a mark upon him, and shadows clung to his eyes and lingered in the echo of his voice, whispering secrets of ambition and longing for dominion. And though he vowed to walk humbly and rebuild, the seeds of fear and awe had already been sown among the Atlanteans, and murmurs began to rise that their king had walked with the abyss itself and returned touched by forces mortal men ought not to know. And thus a rift appeared even among his closest counselors, and whispers of rebellion stirred like wind in the reeds. For power once tasted is seldom surrendered willingly, and Lyara, seeing the change in her beloved, felt her own heart fracture anew, for she loved him still. Yet the man before her bore the weight of gods and darkness alike, and in secret she sought the waters of the hidden wells beneath the city to commune with the spirits of the past, seeking wisdom and strength, for she understood that the survival of Atlan now rested not merely on courage, but on the balance between love, duty, and the tempering of ambition with humility. Days passed, and the sun rose red upon the waters, painting the city in hues of blood and fire, and Thalos walked among his people, tending to the wounded, comforting the fearful, and speaking with words heavy with caution and promise. And yet the Heartfire within him pulsed faintly, a reminder of the abyss that had kissed his soul, and every glance from the citizens was both reverent and wary, for they knew the tides of fortune are as fickle as the ocean itself, and no mortal can stand unshaken in the presence of the divine. And in those nights, when the moons cast silver nets upon the waves, Lyara would walk the bridges of the city alone, her voice lifted in song, a hymn to bind the living and the dead, the seen and unseen, and her melody traveled far, reaching the depths where Abyrath slept. And it is said that even the chained darkness paused to listen, its hunger tempered by the purity of human devotion. Yet fate, that unyielding architect, had not finished its design, for whispers among the High Lords spoke of treasures drawn from the Heartfire, and ambitions once dormant now stirred once more, and some spoke boldly of seeking the abyss itself to claim its power anew. And Thalos, perceiving the spark of folly in mortal hearts, summoned the council and declared, Hear me, O lords of the deep and keepers of Atlan's fate. No mortal shall again disturb the slumber of what we cannot comprehend. No desire shall tempt us to awaken that which sleeps beneath the world. And let this oath bind us as the gods once bound eternity itself. And the lords swore, but even as their voices echoed through the halls, shadows lingered in the corridors, for the Heartfire had left its mark upon the stones, and secrets buried beneath coral and obsidian whispered to those who would listen, calling them to feats of daring, to trials that might bring salvation or damnation alike. In the midst of rebuilding, a great festival was decreed, not of triumph, but of remembrance, to honor the lives lost and the lessons carved into the city's bones. And Thalos and Lyara together walked among the people, offering bread and song, sharing stories of courage and sorrow, and teaching that no glory is greater than the care of the living. And yet even as they celebrated, a distant shadow moved beneath the waves, for Abyrath had not been destroyed. And though bound, it watched, patient as the ages, and it whispered to those who might hear in dreams, offering glimpses of power and eternity, and tempting hearts already heavy with desire. And thus, Atlan, though reborn in humility and tempered by sorrow, carried within it the echo of the abyss, the remembrance of the king's ambition, and the enduring presence of love that sought to bind the mortal and divine together. And Thalos, once proud and unyielding, now walked among his people with the quiet strength of one who has seen the face of darkness and returned to teach the living how to endure. And Lyara, whose voice had calmed the restless tides and whose heart had bridged the mortal and divine, stood beside him, a beacon of hope in a city that knew both the glory of heaven and the shadow of the deep. And thus the saga of Atlan continued, a living testament that even in the presence of ruin, the courage of hearts, the wisdom of love, and the humility of kings may temper the fury of gods and darkness alike. And the years passed over Atlan like a tide, both gentle and unyielding, and the city flourished once more beneath the twin moons, its towers gleaming with the tempered light of the Heartfire. Yet the shadow of what had been stirred ever quietly in hidden currents, for the abyss remembers all who dare awaken it, and even as Thalos aged, his hair turning silver as the foam upon the waves, his eyes held the faintest gleam of the hunger that had once driven him to strike the gate, and in the hearts of the children born of Atlan, whose laughter carried over the coral streets and into the air thick with salt and song, there was the seed of ambition and pride, for the memory of their ancestors' triumphs and calamities lingered like a fragrance that cannot be removed. And so the whispers of the deep grew ever more cunning, threading themselves through dreams and idle thoughts, and calling forth visions of power, of conquest beyond the seas, of the glory that might be wrested from what lay hidden below the waves. And many were tempted, and some yielded, even as Thalos, wise and solemn, walked the city at night, speaking to the waters, praying to Nerathos, and to the spirits of those who had fallen, seeking to bind the currents of desire that stirred the young, teaching that the greatest triumph is the mastery of oneself, and yet knowing in the marrow of his bones that no mortal can ever fully master what is divine. And Lyara, whose beauty had not dimmed with the passing years, though her hair was now streaked with silver like sunlight upon the tide, sang nightly beneath the temples, her voice weaving charms of protection over the people. Yet even she could feel the faint tremor of the abyss, a pulse that lingered like a warning unheeded. And in her visions, she saw the shape of Abyrath, a darkness vast as the night sky, coiled and patient, waiting for the day when pride and desire would open a new gate. And she wept at the thought that the folly of men could undo even the wisdom of gods, and that the lessons of history, though carved in stone and song, might fade as easily as footprints upon the sand. Then, as centuries rolled over the city, a new generation arose, fierce and restless, who had heard the tales of Thalos and the Heartfire, of the abyss and the ocean's wrath, yet believed themselves stronger than the past. And their hearts were bright with courage and tinged with the thrill of daring, and they built new forges, new towers, and new vessels that could traverse the winds above the waves. And in secret, in hidden chambers beneath the city, they sought the old runes, hoping to glimpse the power that had once burst from the deep. And in their zeal they ignored the warnings inscribed by priests long departed, and Lyara, now aged and grave, walked among them, beseeching caution, speaking of the covenant between men and the abyss, of the chains that held the darkness, yet her voice was met with both awe and impatience, and she feared that history might yet repeat itself, that the shadow of pride once awakened could not easily be put to rest. And Thalos, standing beside her, though bent with years, laid his hand upon her shoulder and said, "Even the tide returns to the shore, beloved, yet the ocean remembers. We are not its masters, only its stewards. Teach them, guide them, and pray that the hearts of men heed wisdom before it is too late. But the abyss is patient beyond the measure of years. And in those nights when the moon hid behind the clouds and the waves were still, a voice stirred in the depths, calling to the hearts of those untested, speaking in dreams of glory beyond the sun, of knowledge forbidden and power infinite. And the young lords of Atlan, proud in their vigor, heard it and believed it a challenge, a summons to greatness. And thus it came to pass that one among them, a prince named Caloran, whose ambition rivaled that of his forebears, ventured into the hidden chambers beneath the Heartfire, seeking the ancient runes and the key to the abyss itself. And as he reached out, the light of the Heartfire flickered and dimmed, and the shadows writhed like serpents. And from the deep, a whisper said, "I remember thee, child of mortal pride. Come, and the gates shall open." Caliran, unafraid, struck the stone thrice, as Thalos once had done, and the air around him grew heavy with the scent of eternity and decay, and the waters of the hidden canals trembled. And somewhere in the upper city, Lyara cried aloud, her voice carrying over the wind, "No, tempt not what sleeps beneath, leave it bound." Yet the voice persisted, honeyed and terrible, promising glory, dominion, and immortality, and Caliran, intoxicated with dreams of conquest and fame, yielded, and the gates trembled, and from the deep rose a shadow darker than night, greater than any memory of Abyrath, whose eyes glowed like molten stars, and whose form was coiled and limitless, and the city above quaked, as if the heavens themselves were torn asunder. And Thalos, sensing the awakening, ran to the hidden chambers, calling upon the old words of binding, and Lyara, lifting her hands to the moon, sang the ancient hymn of protection, and their voices intertwined with the chorus of priests and the echoes of the Heartfire. Yet the darkness pressed, and even the gods who once bound it looked down with eyes of sorrow, for the pride of man had once again breached the boundary of mortality and divinity alike. And the sea, once a cradle and protector, now raged with a fury older than memory, and waves taller than towers tore through the city, and lightning split the heavens, and the cry of the people rose in terror and awe, and the saga of Atlan, which had begun with promise and covenant, now surged toward its final reckoning. The hearts of kings, queens, and citizens alike tested against the inexorable will of the abyss, as the story of ambition, love, and divine wrath surged ever onward, unbroken, unstoppable, like the tide itself, carrying the destiny of the city, the people, and all who dared claim dominion over the boundless depths of the world. And so the shadow of Abyrath, awakened by mortal hands, spread like a storm that devours the horizon, and the Heartfire flickered and roared, casting crimson light over the city, and the people of Atlan, struck with terror, fled to the towers and temples, crying aloud to gods and ancestors alike, while Thalos, though bent with age and burdened by the sins of pride, grasped the spear of the sea, his armor gleaming with the borrowed brilliance of the Heartfire, and called to the warriors, the priests, and even the children who had watched the tides of history unfold, saying, "Stand now, for the abyss is not merely a shadow, but the test of all who would claim dominion over the gift of life. And if we fall, let it be with courage, with honor, and with the love that binds man to man and mortal to divine." And Lyara, her hair like silver foam, lifted her voice in the sacred hymn that had long guarded the city, her melody weaving through the streets and into the very stones, and the sound of it struck upon the waves, reaching the chained darkness. And in that music, Abyrath recoiled for a moment, its hunger tempered, yet not quelled, and the ocean itself rose higher than the tallest spire, waves crashing upon towers and bridges, devouring streets, as if the world sought to reclaim the glory it had lent to men. Then Thalos, summoning all the courage that had carried him from youth to the precipice of eternity, descended into the central plaza where the Heartfire pulsed brightest, and there he faced the first tendrils of the abyss, which writhed like serpents of smoke and fire, speaking with the voices of lost kings and fallen cities, saying, "Thou art but mortal, and yet thou thinkest to bind me? Come, and learn the futility of flesh." And he thrust the spear of the sea, forged from the bones of Leviathan, into the heart of the pulsing light, calling upon Nerathos, upon the tides, upon the very covenant that had birthed Atlan, and the spear blazed like the sun, and the light pierced the darkness. Yet Abyrath laughed, a sound that shattered glass, stone, and bone alike, and surged upward with a roar that shook the heavens, calling forth storms that tore the sky and boiled the seas, sending even the bravest warriors to their knees in awe and despair. Lyara, seeing her husband's struggle and the fury of the abyss, ran to his side, placing her hands upon the spear, lending her own life force to the bond. And together they channeled the ancient magic, the prayers, the hymns, and the love that had shaped the city, weaving it into a cord of light that bound the first shadows of the abyss. Yet even as they fought, Abyrath tore through walls, towers crumbled into the rising flood, and the Heartfire, overstrained, shattered in bursts of molten brilliance that ignited the night sky and sent sparks into the clouds like falling stars. And the people of Atlan cried, some in terror, some in wonder, as the ocean rose, and waves as tall as mountains surged into the streets, consuming the temples, bridges, and markets, and the cries of the fallen mingled with the thunder of the storm. And in that moment of ultimate reckoning, Thalos saw the truth that the gods had long whispered in dreams and visions, that no mortal can claim the abyss, that power without humility invites ruin, and that love and courage are the only lights that may endure when all else falls. And with a final cry that shook the heavens, he plunged the spear of the sea deep into the Heartfire's core, binding Abyrath once more. Yet the strain was terrible, and his body, racked with the weight of centuries, fell to the ground, and Lyara, clutching him, wept aloud, for she knew that the price had been paid in flesh and soul alike. And the waves, as if obeying the sorrow of the city, rose one final time, washing over towers, streets, and temples, and Atlan, the pearl of creation, the city that had once touched the clouds and sung with the light of gods, sank beneath the sea, leaving only memory and legend. And the Heartfire's light, now dimmed and pulsing faintly beneath the coral and stone, marked the place where glory and pride had met fate. Yet the story did not end, for Nerathos, from his watery throne, cast a gaze upon the surface, and the people who survived told of a figure in silver armor, a king and his queen, walking the waves as though time itself bowed to their courage, guarding the city's ruins from the shadows. And it is said that on stormy nights, when the moon is hidden and the wind cries through the coral towers, the song of Lyara and the light of Thalos' spear may still be glimpsed beneath the waves. A reminder that though the city fell, love endured, courage persisted, and even in ruin, the legacy of Atlan whispered to all who dared seek glory with humility, and thus the myth of Atlan, the rise and fall, the covenant of sea and sky, the love, the ambition, the pride, the sacrifice, and the redemption endures forever, carried upon the tides, whispered by the winds, sung by the deep, and remembered in the hearts of mortals who look upon the oceans and dream of kingdoms lost yet never forgotten. And so the epic closes, not with silence, but with the eternal song of the sea, which teaches that even in darkness, light remains, and even in destruction, stories live, and thus the saga of Atlan rests in the memory of the world, awaiting those who will listen and learn from the glory and the fall of what once was. And the years flowed on like the endless tides, carrying with them the memory of Atlan. For though the city had sunk beneath the waves, its essence lingered in the hearts of those who survived, and the descendants of its people spread across distant shores, telling stories of towers that had pierced the clouds, of streets paved with light, of the Heartfire that had shone brighter than the sun. And they whispered of Thalos and Lyara, whose courage had bound the abyss and whose love had tempered the fury of the gods, and in every retelling the tale grew, as myths do, yet retained the weight of truth. For even in memory the pulse of Atlan could not be silenced, and in dreams, when the wind carries the scent of salt and the stars mirror the waves, the dead city rises again, gleaming beneath the surface. visible to those who listen with the heart rather than the eyes, and among the descendants. Some born with the sea in their veins still feel the echo of the Heartfire, a light that calls them to courage, to wisdom, to love tempered with humility. And in this way, the covenant of the deep endured, a bond between mortal and divine that no calamity could entirely sever. And the gods, who had once looked upon the city with pride and sorrow, observed the legacy, for though their will had been defied, the hearts of men had proven capable of greatness even in the shadow of their folly. And Nerathos, seated upon the fathomless throne of waves, cast his gaze over the waters and saw in the children of Atlan the promise of renewal, tempered with the memory of loss. And he whispered to the currents that carried the echo of the past, saying, "So long as men remember humility and love, the abyss shall remain bound, and the legacy of the city that reached for the stars shall endure. And yet, in the hidden depths where the light of mortals never reaches, Abyrath stirred, its hunger patient as eternity itself. And though it had been chained by spear and song, it learned to wait, to whisper in dreams, to tempt hearts untested by the wisdom of ages. And so across the seas and rivers of distant lands, men and women began to hear the voice of shadows, calling them to greatness, promising knowledge, power, and dominion beyond comprehension. And the descendants of Atlan, bearing the blood of Thalos and Lyara, recognized the voice, and some resisted, guided by the lessons carved into their souls, while others, seduced by ambition, followed where the whispers led. And in this eternal struggle, the tale of Atlan became not only a story of glory and ruin, but a living test of all who would seek the bounds of mortal and divine. And the city itself, though lost to the ocean, remained a symbol, a myth, a lesson written in light and shadow for generations yet unborn. And Lyara, whose voice had once calmed the storm, lingered in the memory of those who knew her song, guiding hearts, weaving courage and compassion into the spirit of the world. And Thalos, whose hands had pierced the darkness and whose eyes had seen the face of eternity, walked still among the currents, invisible but present, a guardian and reminder that even kings who reach too high may yet serve as protectors when tempered by love and duty. And thus the story of the rise and fall, of the covenant, of pride and redemption, stretched across the ages like the endless horizon, carrying the lessons of power, the danger of ambition, and the enduring truth that courage, wisdom, and love are the truest treasures of all, surpassing even the brilliance of the Heartfire, the glory of towers and the might of gods themselves. And in this truth lay the final moral of Atlan, the lost kingdom beneath the waves, whose saga, though concluded in destruction, yet lived in every heart that dared to dream, to hope and to act with honor. And even as the ocean washed over the ruins, claiming all that had been built, the essence of Atlan shone in the stars, in the tides, in the winds, and in the song of every human soul that dared to look upon the world and seek greatness tempered by humility. And thus the myth endured, eternal and unbroken, a story not merely of a city or its kings, but of the very nature of mankind and the gods who watch, waiting to see if the lessons of the deep are heeded or forgotten. And the seas themselves carried the memory, whispering through the coral among the bones of towers, and within the hidden heart of the Heartfire, that though ruin may fall upon the mortal realm, the courage of love, the power of devotion, and the wisdom of humility can bind even the darkness, and that one day perhaps Atlan shall rise again, not in towers of stone or streets of silver, but in the hearts of men, a beacon to guide those who would walk with honor, face the abyss without fear, and remember that even in the shadow of calamity, stories endure, and the song of the lost kingdom beneath the waves shall never be silenced.